My name is Simone Aldridge. I'm 31 years old, and last Thanksgiving, in the middle of my in-laws' dining room with 18 people seated around the table, my brother-in-law stood up and told my husband that I had been secretly draining money from their family's renovation business. He even had a folder, printed pages, bank records, email screenshots, the whole thing. He slid it across the table like he'd been rehearsing the moment for months. The room went completely still. My husband's mother set down her fork. Someone turned off the football game in the background, and everyone looked at me. But I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just reached into my bag, pulled out my own folder, and set it on the table. Let me start at the beginning, because none of this happened overnight. My husband's name is Miles. We've been married for 4 years, together for 6. He and his brother grew up in a small town in Ohio, and when their father passed away 3 years ago, they inherited equal shares of the family business, a mid-sized renovation and contracting company their dad had built from nothing over 30 years. It was the kind of business that had their last name on the trucks and their father's handshake reputation holding it together. When we got married, Miles was already the one running the day-to-day operations. He'd been doing it since his mid-20s. His brother Derek had always been more of a silent partner. He took a share of the profits but wasn't involved in the work. Derek and I had never been close, but for the first 2 years we were civil. He came to Christmas. He came to the wedding. He gave a toast that was maybe 30 seconds long and mostly about Miles, which was fine by me. But somewhere around year 3, something shifted. I started noticing the way he'd talk over me at family dinners, or make little comments when Miles wasn't within earshot. "You must love having access to all that business money. Must be nice not having to worry. You're smart, Simone. You really landed yourself a good one." Every time I mentioned it to Miles, he'd say that was just how Derek was. He doesn't mean anything by it. He's just a little rough around the edges. I let it go. I told myself it wasn't worth the energy. But last fall, things started getting strange. Miles mentioned that some payments weren't matching up in the business accounts. A few vendor invoices had been logged, but the funds had gone somewhere unexpected. He wasn't panicking, just puzzled. He figured it was a bookkeeping error. He brought in a CPA to do a quiet review. That review was still ongoing when Thanksgiving arrived. I'd been dreading that dinner for weeks. Something felt off. Derek had been unusually quiet in the weeks leading up to it. No texts, no quick phone calls with Miles like he sometimes did. And then, 2 days before Thanksgiving, Miles mentioned that Derek had asked to have a quote-unquote family conversation over the holiday. Miles didn't think much of it. I thought about it constantly. We drove 3 hours to his mother's house in Dayton. The table was set beautifully. His mom always went all out, matching napkins, the good dishes, a centerpiece with dried orange slices and cinnamon sticks. There were cousins I recognized from the wedding, an aunt who always talked too loud, a family friend who'd known their dad since high school. It was supposed to be one of those warm, safe, full-table Thanksgivings. I noticed Derek the moment we walked in. He was standing near the kitchen counter, and when he saw me, he didn't smile the way people smile when they're happy to see you. He smiled the way someone does right before they think they've won something. Dinner started fine. People passed dishes around. Someone made a joke about the turkey being dry that made everyone laugh. Miles refilled my water glass without me asking, which is one of those small things that makes me remember why I married him. For about an hour, it felt normal. Then Derek cleared his throat. He was sitting across the table, 2 seats down from Miles. He stood up slowly, like he planned every movement. He said he was sorry to do this at Thanksgiving, but he felt like he'd been sitting on something important for too long, and he owed it to the family, especially to his brother, to say it out loud. The table got quiet. Miles frowned slightly and asked what he was talking about. Derek reached down beside his chair and picked up a manila folder. He set it on the table, opened it, and slid several pages toward Miles. Then he looked at me. He said the CPA review had turned up some irregularities. He said several transfers over the past 8 months had been authorized from an account that only 2 people had access to, Miles and me. He said he'd done some additional digging on his own, and what he found pointed in one direction. Then he said my name, and he said I had been stealing from the business. I heard someone at the end of the table inhale sharply. Miles's mother looked at the pages in front of Miles, then looked at me. A cousin leaned over to see. The room had the particular silence of people who want to hear everything but are pretending to look at their plates. Miles was staring at the papers. His jaw was tight. I could see him reading, processing, trying to reconcile what was in front of him with the person he'd been married to for 4 years. That expression, that frozen, confused expression, was the hardest part of the whole night. Derek sat back down and crossed his arms. He looked almost relieved, like he'd been carrying a weight and had finally put it down on someone else. I took a slow breath. Then I said quietly that I appreciated him bringing this to the family's attention. Derek looked surprised. He'd expected me to panic, or cry, or start defending myself immediately. He hadn't expected calm. I told Miles that I wanted him to look at those pages carefully. I told him to look at the dates on the transfers. Miles looked up at me slowly. I told him to look at the account numbers. Derek leaned forward a little and started to say something, but I kept talking. I said that 8 months ago, I had actually flagged one of those transfers myself. I told Miles that I had sent him an email about it. He probably didn't remember because we'd been in the middle of moving at the time, and a lot of things got lost in the shuffle. That the email existed. The timestamp existed, and I had not deleted it. I reached into my bag and pulled out my own folder. I want to be honest. I hadn't known Thanksgiving would be the moment, but I had known something was coming. The CPA review, Derek's silence, the way he'd watched me at the last family gathering in September. It all added up to something. So a few weeks earlier, I had gone back through 18 months of business emails, account statements, and transfer records. I organized everything chronologically. I printed it. I brought it with me because I'd told myself that if Derek was going to say something, I wanted to be ready. I set the folder in front of Miles and asked him to open it to page 3. The table was completely still. Miles opened it. He looked at page 3. It was a printed email chain. My name at the top, sent to Miles on a Thursday afternoon 8 months ago. The subject line said, "Vendor payment discrepancy. Please review." In the email, I had written out exactly which transfer looked wrong, which account it had come from, and why the amount didn't match the invoice on file. I had flagged it. I had put it in writing. I had asked Miles to look into it. Miles stared at the page for a long moment without speaking. Derek made a noise, half laugh, half scoff. He said that anyone could write an email. He said it didn't prove anything. He said the real question was where the money went. I told him that was exactly the right question. I asked Miles to turn to page 7. Page 7 was a summary I had put together from the CPA's preliminary findings, which Miles had shared with me 2 months ago because I had asked to see them. Buried in the summary, on the second to last page of the original report, was a notation that one of the flagged transfers had been initiated through a third-party payment portal. The portal account was not linked to me. It was not linked to Miles. The email address on the portal account was 1 letter off from the business email, the kind of thing you might miss if you were skimming, but if you looked closely, it was unmistakably not our account. I had looked closely. I looked at Derek and said I'd spent a few evenings researching that portal account. His posture changed. It was small, just a slight stiffening, a shift in how he was holding his shoulders. But I saw it. Miles saw it too, because Miles knows his brother. I said that the portal account had been created 7 months ago. I said the billing address attached to it was a P.O. box in Columbus. Then I looked at Derek and asked in front of everyone whether he still had that P.O. box, the one on Morse Road. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silence. Earlier, people were listening. Now they were barely breathing. Derek's face went through several expressions very quickly: surprise, calculation, anger. He landed on anger and said I had no idea what I was talking about. He said I was deflecting. He said I was deflecting. He said I was doing exactly what someone guilty does when they get caught, pointing the finger somewhere else. But Miles was still looking at the pages. Derek turned to his brother and said his name twice. Miles. Miles. He said I had clearly prepared all of this in advance, which meant I had known I would need an excuse. He said that was proof of guilt. Miles looked up from the folder slowly. His voice was very quiet. He asked Derek how he would know about the P.O. box on Morse Road. Derek opened his mouth, closed it. Miles asked again. He said he hadn't told anyone about that P.O. box. He said the only reason he even knew about it was because the CPA had mentioned it to him privately last week. He said he hadn't even told me. He looked at me when he said that last part. I nodded. I told him I hadn't heard about it from the CPA. I'd found it through the portal account records. Then I said, the fact that Derek just knew exactly which P.O. Kani box I was referring to without me giving an address. Maybe someone at the table wanted to think about that for a moment. Miles set down the folder. He looked at his brother for a long time. Derek was shaking his head, telling Miles not to listen to me, saying I'd turned him against his own family, saying I'd planned all of this, saying he was the one who'd been protecting Miles all along. But the more Derek talked, the quieter the table got, and the quieter the table got, the more exposed Derek looked. Miles finally spoke. He said, "Derek, the CPA found a portal account we don't recognize. You apparently know exactly which P.O. box is attached to it without being told. And you chose Thanksgiving in front of Mom and the whole family to accuse my wife instead of calling me privately like a brother would." He paused. He asked, "Why?" Derek didn't have an answer. Not a real one. He tried a few more angles. "I'm just asking questions. I'm trying to protect the family, Miles. You know I would never." But the room had turned. His mother was looking at him with an expression I won't try to describe because I don't think I could do it justice. The family friend who'd known their father 30 years was staring at the tablecloth. I wasn't celebrating. That's one thing I want to be clear about. There was nothing satisfying about watching that happen at the Thanksgiving table. I'd spent weeks hoping I was wrong. I'd spent the drive to Dayton telling myself that maybe Derek had just made a mistake, that maybe the account was some administrative error, that maybe there was an innocent explanation I hadn't thought of. But I'd also been accused, in front of everyone my husband loves, of stealing from a business that his father spent his whole life building. So I said what I needed to say. Miles's mother asked Derek very quietly if any of this was true. Derek didn't answer, and in my experience, when a person chooses silence over denial, that tells you something. Miles asked Derek to leave. He said it calmly, but it wasn't a suggestion. He said they would talk more when the lawyers were involved, and he would be contacting the CPA first thing Monday morning. He said he needed Derek to go. Derek stood up slowly. He didn't look at me when he left. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, said something low to his mother that I couldn't hear, and walked to the front door. The sound of it closing behind him felt very loud. For a minute, nobody said anything. Then Miles's aunt cleared her throat and asked if anyone wanted more sweet potato casserole, and it was the most perfectly timed thing anyone has ever said in my presence. A few people laughed, the tentative kind, more relief than humor. Someone picked up the serving spoon. The family friend excused himself to the restroom. Slowly, like air returning to a room after a window opens, conversation came back to the table, quieter than before, more careful, but present. Miles didn't say much for the rest of the meal. He sat next to me, and at some point during dessert he reached over and put his hand on top of mine and left it there. He didn't have to say anything. I understood. In the weeks that followed, the CPA completed the full review. The portal account was traced back to Derek through an IP address and a recovered billing record. Over 14 months, he had redirected just over $60,000 in vendor payments through that account. Miles filed a police report. Derek hired an attorney. The civil and criminal process is ongoing. Miles and I have had a lot of conversations since then, some of them easy, some of them not. He told me he wished he had listened more carefully when I first raised concerns about the accounts. I told him I understood. It's hard to see clearly when it's your own family. He knows that. I know that. What I think about most when I think back on that night is not the moment Derek left. It's the smaller moment before it. When Miles set down the folder and looked at me, really looked at me, and I could see him choosing. Not between me and his brother, not between what Derek said and what I said, but between what was easy and what was true, and he chose what was true. That's the person I married. That's why I still sit across from him at our own table every night, passing dishes and talking about small things, and feel lucky. The food at that Thanksgiving, for what it's worth, was genuinely excellent. I had 2 pieces of pie, and I have no regrets about either one. I keep thinking about the folder, not what was in it. I've thought about that enough, but the fact that I almost didn't bring it. The week before Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table with a stack of printed pages and asked myself if I was being paranoid. I asked myself if I was turning something small into something bigger than it needed to be. I almost put it all back in the drawer and told myself to stop looking for trouble. I'm glad I didn't. But what I realized since then is that being glad isn't really the point. The point is that what happened at that table didn't come down to luck. And it didn't come down to Derek finally tripping over himself. It came down to something I had chosen, quietly and without any guarantee it would matter, over several weeks before that dinner ever happened. I think about that a lot when I hear people say that the truth always comes out eventually. I used to believe that too. Now I'm not sure it's the whole story. The truth came out at that Thanksgiving table because I had done the work to make sure it could. I had gone back through 18 months of records. I had organized the dates. I'd asked the uncomfortable questions, followed the numbers to places that made me uneasy, and written it all down instead of hoping someone else would figure it out. The truth didn't arrive on its own. I carried it there. That's the thing about integrity, not as a concept, but as a daily practice. It's not just about being honest when someone asks you a direct question. It's about what you do in the weeks when no one is watching and nothing has exploded yet. It's about sending that email to your husband about a payment discrepancy, even though you're in the middle of moving and exhausted and part of you just wants to let it go. It's about keeping a record not because you're planning for war, but because you respect the truth enough to treat it carefully. And then there's the harder part, which is doing all of that without knowing if it will matter. I didn't know Derek was going to choose Thanksgiving. I didn't know Miles would be sitting at that table reading those pages with 18 people watching. I just knew that something felt wrong and I made a choice to pay attention instead of looking away. That takes something. I don't have a clean word for it. It's the part of yourself that keeps going when you're tired and uncertain, and the easier thing would be to close the laptop and go to bed. Miles has it. I've watched him work through problems the way his father apparently did. Slowly, methodically, without drama. I think that's why he could look at those pages clearly even when it cost him something. What Derek didn't understand, and what I think a lot of people misunderstand, is that being smart about a situation is not the same as being cold. I wasn't at that table to destroy him. I was there to protect what was true. Those are different things, and the difference matters. I had 2 pieces of pie afterward. Miles and I drove home mostly in silence, and somewhere around the state line he reached over and turned the radio up a little, and I thought, this is what it looks like when something hard ends and something real remains. Not perfect, not without cost, but real. I'll take real every time.